In the years following World War II, the United States experienced a quiet but profound shift in how people formed connections. Cities were expanding, families were separating across states, and many adults found themselves living more isolated lives than they had ever imagined. In this environment, the Lonely Hearts advertisements printed in the back pages of newspapers became a lifeline. These small box listings offered companionship, hope, and in many cases, a sense of belonging to individuals who felt lost in the growing anonymity of modern life. It was within this social landscape that two strangers, Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez, would eventually meet. Both were shaped by experiences of isolation, unfulfilled desires, and a yearning for affection that neither had successfully found in their earlier years. Their story cannot be understood without first understanding the emotional and psychological terrain that defined their lives before they ever crossed paths. Martha Beck grew up facing persistent adversity. Throughout childhood and adolescence, she struggled to find acceptance, often feeling set apart from the people around her. Reports from the period describe a woman who longed for stability and emotional intimacy, yet repeatedly encountered disappointment in her attempts to build meaningful relationships. By adulthood, she had become a single mother of 2 children, working as a nurse in Florida. Despite her responsibilities, the desire for a deeper, more dependable connection remained a central force in her life. It was this search for companionship that eventually led her to the personal ads. Raymond Fernandez's story was markedly different, yet carried a similar undercurrent of loneliness. Born to Spanish parents and raised partly overseas, he lived a life that was frequently in motion. He married young, fathered 4 children, and later abandoned his family under circumstances that remain complex and debated by historians. During a period working at sea, he suffered a severe head injury when a steel hatch struck him. Afterward, acquaintances noted significant changes in his personality, an event that some later speculated may have contributed to his increasingly erratic behavior. Following this incident, Fernandez spent time in prison for a minor theft. While incarcerated, he encountered individuals whose influence would shape his worldview. He developed a belief that he possessed an unusual ability to attract and manipulate others, something he attributed to esoteric practices he claimed to have learned behind bars. Whether these beliefs reflected injury, insecurity, or genuine conviction, they contributed to a persona that combined charm, calculation, and an unwavering confidence in his ability to persuade. By the late 1940s, Raymond had developed a pattern of seeking out women through Lonely Hearts listings. He wrote letters, presented himself as a gentleman seeking commitment, and slowly gained the trust of those who responded. His true objective, however, was financial rather than emotional. By appealing to women who sought affection, he found ways to obtain their savings, belongings, or resources before moving on. When Martha Beck placed her personal advertisement, she did so in a moment of vulnerability. She was searching for someone who could offer companionship and stability, a partner who might finally anchor her. When Fernandez replied, the correspondence that followed felt to her like the beginning of a long-awaited chapter in life. Their early exchanges were affectionate, filled with promises and attention that she had rarely received. The connection deepened quickly, not because of a shared background, but because both individuals recognized in each other something they felt they had been missing: validation, attention, and the illusion of unconditional acceptance. Their meeting marked the convergence of 2 people whose needs and insecurities aligned in a way that created both intense attachment and profound instability. The Lonely Hearts columns had been designed to foster connection, yet in this case, they set in motion a partnership that would become one of the most studied examples of how emotional vulnerability can transform into a destructive bond. When Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez finally met in person, the intensity of their connection accelerated at a pace neither had anticipated. What began as a correspondence between 2 isolated adults quickly transformed into a relationship defined by dependency, reinforcement, and escalating emotional stakes. Their bond formed not through a shared vision of the future, but through an unspoken agreement that each provided something the other lacked. For Martha, it was devotion. For Raymond, it was loyalty. Together, those needs created a powerful and ultimately destabilizing dynamic. During their earliest days together in Florida, Fernandez relied on a familiar pattern presenting charm, attentiveness, and the appearance of romantic commitment. Yet this time, the response he received was different. Martha did not behave like the women he had previously contacted for financial gain. She became deeply invested in him almost immediately. Her attachment was so strong that when he returned to New York, she followed him without invitation, arriving at his doorstep with a certainty that surprised even him. Her unexpected arrival revealed the depth of her emotional commitment and marked the moment their relationship shifted from a fleeting involvement to a consuming partnership. It was within this period of rapid entanglement that Fernandez shared with her the nature of his ongoing schemes. He described the practice of writing to women through Lonely Hearts advertisements, gaining their confidence and, when possible, convincing them to part with money or valuables. This was the point at which most individuals would have distanced themselves. Instead, Martha responded with a level of devotion that would reshape both of their lives. Rather than objecting, she accepted his explanation and began to see herself as the one person he could trust with the truth. That feeling of exclusivity strengthened her loyalty and, from her perspective, marked her as indispensable. To support Raymond's activities, Martha took a step that has been widely analyzed by criminologists studying attachment and identity dissolution. She relinquished custody of her 2 children to the Salvation Army, stating that she wished to focus solely on Fernandez and their future together. This decision reflects a significant psychological shift. Experts have noted that individuals who struggle with self-worth sometimes attach themselves so completely to a partner that they begin to view their own responsibilities, relationships, and identity as secondary. Martha's choice was not simply an act of love, it was the formal abandonment of her previous life in favor of a new one defined entirely by her devotion to Raymond. For Fernandez, Martha's loyalty offered an opportunity. He believed she could be an asset in his schemes if she played the role of his sister. In that era, an unmarried woman receiving a male suitor might raise suspicion. But a suitor who arrived with a female relative appeared trustworthy, respectable, and safe. In practice, Martha's presence eased the concerns of women who might otherwise hesitate to welcome a stranger into their home. She provided legitimacy, comfort, and a facade of stability. Yet their partnership was far from harmonious. As Fernandez communicated with other women, an essential component of his fraudulent strategy, Martha struggled with intense jealousy. She understood intellectually that these relationships were deceptive, but emotionally she found them difficult to accept. Her desire to be the sole focus of Raymond's affection clashed directly with the nature of his schemes, creating tension that grew steadily as their activities continued. Criminologists refer to this kind of partnership as a mutual reinforcement dynamic. Each individual supports and amplifies the behaviors of the other, sometimes unintentionally. Raymond encouraged Martha's dependence by sharing private details of his operations, granting her a sense of importance. In turn, Martha's devotion emboldened Raymond, giving him the confidence that he had someone who would not abandon him, even as he engaged in increasingly risky decisions. But alongside that reinforcement was a volatile emotional component. Martha's jealousy, fear of abandonment, and desire for exclusivity began to influence their interactions with victims. Situations that Raymond might once have handled with distance now occurred under the pressure of Martha's emotional reactions, and it was within this tension between fraud, dependency, and possessiveness that their partnership took a darker and irreversible turn. As pressure mounted in New York following the disappearance of Janet Faye, Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck made a sudden and calculated decision to leave the state. Their departure was not the act of a coordinated criminal enterprise, but rather the reaction of 2 individuals under growing emotional and logistical strain. They sought distance, anonymity, and enough time to regain control of a situation that was quickly slipping away from them. Their choice of destination, Michigan, reflected the same method they had used many times before, responding to Lonely Hearts advertisements and identifying individuals who might be receptive to companionship. Their travels brought them to the home of Delphine Downing, a young widow living near Grand Rapids. Downing was 28 years old, financially stable, and raising a small daughter. She represented in many ways the kind of person who was most susceptible to promises of affection and stability. The post-war era left many widowed or single women navigating unfamiliar economic and social challenges. For some, meeting new people through written correspondence offered both hope and a sense of security. When Fernandez and Beck entered Downing's life, their arrival appeared to follow the same pattern as Raymond's previous interactions: polite conversation, expressions of interest, and a carefully crafted persona designed to establish trust. Martha continued playing the role of Raymond's sister, presenting herself as a supportive presence rather than a romantic partner. This dynamic helped lower social barriers and fostered an environment in which Downing felt comfortable hosting them. However, unlike earlier encounters, the emotional volatility between Fernandez and Beck had begun to intensify. Their partnership was no longer defined solely by coordinated deception. It was now shaped by fear, jealousy, and the constant pressure of maintaining their facade. Their internal conflicts increasingly influenced their behaviors, creating an unpredictable atmosphere within the Downing household. Historical accounts suggest that tensions escalated quickly. Downing became visibly unsettled during their stay, possibly sensing inconsistencies in their story or observing behavioral cues that contradicted their claims. The presence of her young daughter added another level of complication. Children are often intuitive observers, and her reactions to the unfamiliar visitors may have heightened Delphine's concerns. Fernandez attempted to manage the situation in a way that he believed would diffuse the tension, while Beck's responses were shaped by heightened anxiety and fear of exposure. Criminologists studying the Lonely Hearts case have frequently pointed to this period as the moment their partnership lost any semblance of control. What had once been a series of calculated financial deceptions had now evolved into a high-stress environment where decision-making was impaired, emotions were volatile, and the risk of discovery was escalating by the hour. Following the events inside the Downing home, Fernandez and Beck remained in the residence for several days. This detail has long fascinated investigators and psychologists because it challenges the assumption that their actions were driven solely by panic. Instead, their decision to stay suggests a complex mixture of denial, rationalization, and an attempt to maintain normalcy in circumstances that were anything but normal. Meanwhile, neighbors began noticing irregularities. In close-knit communities such as suburban Michigan in the late 1940s, household routines rarely went unnoticed. Noise, unusual activity, or changes in behavior could quickly prompt curiosity. The Downing residence, once quiet and predictable, had become a source of concern for those living nearby. Over time, these observations coalesced into genuine suspicion, leading residents to contact local authorities. When police arrived on the scene, the unraveling of Fernandez and Beck's partnership accelerated rapidly. Their initial explanations were inconsistent, and the investigators' questions exposed fractures in their story. Further examination of the home revealed evidence that something was profoundly amiss, prompting a deeper inquiry that soon contradicted the couple's claims. The arrest of Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck on March 1, 1949, was the culmination of weeks of emotional instability, escalating decisions, and the inability to maintain the deception that had long been central to their lives. Once in custody, Fernandez began speaking freely, offering information without the resistance typically associated with high-profile investigations. His statements, which included references to additional victims and confessions of broader patterns of behavior, drew immediate attention from law enforcement and the media alike. What had begun as a partnership rooted in mutual need had now entered its final phase. A public reckoning shaped by legal scrutiny, psychological evaluation, and the growing fascination of an audience eager to understand how such a relationship could form, evolve, and ultimately collapse. The arrest of Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck marked the beginning of one of the most publicized criminal proceedings of the late 1940s. As the pair were transferred from Michigan back to New York, interest in their case grew rapidly. Newspapers across the country seized upon the story, drawn to the unusual nature of their partnership, the Lonely Hearts backdrop, and the dramatic confessions Fernandez initially provided. In an era hungry for sensational headlines, the Lonely Hearts case offered an irresistible combination of romance, deception, and tragedy. From the moment they entered the New York courtroom, it became clear that the legal process would unfold not merely as a trial, but as a spectacle. The courtroom was frequently filled beyond capacity, with spectators eager to witness the pair whose relationship had captured national attention. This environment shaped every stage of the proceedings. For investigators and prosecutors, the case represented a rare opportunity to confront a pattern of crimes that crossed state lines and involved a partnership unlike any they had encountered before. For the public, it represented something more psychological, a window into how love, dependency, and manipulation can intersect in extreme ways. One of the most striking aspects of the trial was the difference in how Fernandez and Beck were portrayed. Raymond often presented himself as composed, articulate, and confident. He attempted at times to distance himself from earlier statements, including his wide-ranging confessions, and he framed many of his actions as an attempt to protect Martha. His testimony frequently circled back to his professed devotion to her, reinforcing his belief that his motivations had been shaped by loyalty rather than malice. Martha Beck, however, faced a very different form of scrutiny. Media coverage often focused not on her testimony or her role in the events, but on her appearance, particularly her weight, and on preconceived notions about women who defied societal expectations. Headlines emphasized superficial details, reinforcing stereotypes and shaping public opinion in ways disconnected from the actual evidence. The disparity in coverage reflected broader cultural biases of the era and raised questions about how gender influences the public's perception of criminal defendants. Despite the theatrical atmosphere surrounding the trial, the legal arguments remained focused on the facts of the case, especially the death of Janet Faye, which formed the core of the indictment. Prosecutors presented evidence illustrating the couple's movement, their deceptive practices, and inconsistencies in their explanations. The 73-page confession signed by both Fernandez and Beck, though contested in parts, played a significant role in shaping the jury's understanding of their relationship and activities. For many observers, the document provided insight into the intensity of their partnership and the ways in which their emotional dependency influenced decision-making. Defense attorneys attempted to portray the pair in a more sympathetic light, highlighting influences such as Fernandez's head injury, their turbulent psychological states, and the pressure that accompanies fear of discovery. They also stressed that the two did not operate as cold, methodical offenders, but rather as individuals caught in a destructive cycle that neither fully controlled. Yet these arguments did little to counterbalance the weight of the confession and the prosecution's narrative. As the trial progressed, public fascination only intensified. News outlets reported everything from minor courtroom disruptions to comments the couple made while waiting for proceedings to resume. At times, crowds gathered outside the courthouse in such numbers that additional security measures were put in place to maintain order. The trial had transformed into one of the era's most closely watched legal events. Ultimately, both Fernandez and Beck were found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Janet Faye. The verdict carried with it the mandatory sentence of execution in New York's electric chair. Although their crimes spanned multiple states, New York pursued the case with particular urgency, and the decision reflected the jury's belief that their partnership had crossed a moral and legal threshold for which no lesser sentence was appropriate. In the months that followed, the couple remained incarcerated at Sing Sing prison. Reports from the period described a relationship marked by fluctuation, moments of affection intertwined with tension and arguments. Yet through it all, both continued to assert that their bond was genuine, even if the world around them saw it through a lens of disbelief and moral condemnation. On the day of their execution in March 1951, each offered parting statements that reflected their enduring devotion. Fernandez declared his love for Martha, questioning what the public could truly understand about the nature of their connection. Beck, walking to her fate with composure, echoed that sentiment. To her, their story was, above all else, a love story, one shaped by longing, distorted by insecurity, and ultimately consumed by the consequences of their choices. Their case lives on today not because of its sensational elements, but because it forces us to examine the powerful psychological forces that can emerge when vulnerability and dependency intersect. It serves as a reminder that relationships built on imbalance, fear, or identity loss can lead individuals down paths they never intended to travel. Understanding those dynamics remains essential, not only for criminology, but for recognizing the signs of unhealthy attachment in everyday life.